This is The Fit Mess, conversations with world-class experts in the fields of mental, physical, and emotional health. In this episode,
you have to allow yourself to be as you are before you go about the change, right? If you are trying to lose weight, for instance, from a place of hate, it just doesn't work. Like, these projects don't work.
Now here are your hosts, Zach and Jeremy.
Body image. If you live in a Western culture, you likely struggle with your body, how it looks, how it feels, and how it makes you feel. We have our own struggles with this. That's why we're excited to share this episode with you this week. Our guest is the president of the Yoga Clinic in New York City. She is an author. Her name is Erica Mather. And Zach, you know, the title of her book is Your Body, Your Best Friend. I don't know about you, but my body has never been my best friend.
I hear you. I am trying so hard right now to do the things that make me happy physically, that allows me to, you know, like look the way I want to look, to feel the way I want to feel. And my body keeps betraying me
over and
physically.
Over. Yes, totally.
I am now dealing with, you know, I mentioned I was getting back into CrossFit, and, you know, I went really slow. I went super slow, light weights, not going like I normally would. And I'm like 2 weeks in and my right knee is killing me. Like, not like I'm sore. It's like clicking when I walk, killing me kind of thing. Like, it's not a good knee soreness, which I'm just going to have to take a break again. And that sucks.
It's funny how often I have the same thing. Like, I told you I'd started that running program, which I have not. I don't think I've ran since we last talked about it. And I remember out on the run, my knee starting to hurt and just feeling like this is what happens every time. You get all gung ho, you get fired up, you start doing something, even if you take it slow, all of a sudden something hurts. And it feels like no matter how much I do try to take care of my body, it always finds a way to go, I'm good. And just sit down and play some video games.
Yeah. You don't need to go do this stuff. I don't like this.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I'm struggling now with my knee, my left foot, my right hip, my left shoulder, the right side of my neck. Like, it's just all zigzagging all the way up my body. And, you know, 2 weeks of going back to CrossFit, and I'm like, I need to give it a rest. I got to go back to yoga full time.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to give up on CrossFit. I am going to slow down even further, you know, really modify as heavily as I can. I should have gone this morning, but there was a whole bunch of squats, which is what did it for me, is the bend to my knee with weights on it. So I skipped this morning. Wednesday, it's just like death by rowing machine. So I'll go take that one on.
There you go. The interesting thing, though, is not just the physical relationship with our body, but the emotional one, the way that our connection to ourself, the space we take up in a room, the way we see ourselves in the mirror, it can have really damaging effects on our mental health if that relationship is not a good one. And that's why this is, and I'll just be upfront, as you probably have already noticed if you're listening to this episode, this is the longest interview we will have ever published, because there's so much to get into as those two worlds collide, your mental health and your relationship with your body. And, you know, it's funny for me, this comes up a lot with dancing. I have never enjoyed dancing. There's no part of it that I would look forward to. I would dread any time that I was in a space where I knew dancing was going to be happening, and I was going to have to be like, oh yeah, I don't do that. That's not for me. It largely comes down to, I know what this body is capable of, and dancing is not on the menu. That's not going to happen in any way that anyone is going to want to be around, see, witness, participate with in any way. And I know that comes down to, like, I'm not comfortable in my own skin. So flailing this big floppy sack of meat around on a dance floor has never been something appealing to me.
I am the same way, but again, I won't do it in public. But when my daughter says, hey, let's do the Shanti size workout where it's just all dancing. Right. I had to try that one in the living room, and my daughter confirmed that I should not ever go out in public like that. But I had a good time in private. It was wonderful, flailing around where nobody except my daughter could judge me.
Right. Where nobody could possibly be aware or have evidence that this ever happened.
So now that she mentioned it, though, and she said that I could never do it in public, the first opportunity I get, I'm going to do it just to embarrass her.
There is something about doing ridiculous, embarrassing things with your kids that somehow gets you off the hook for any accountability for that ridiculous thing. Like if you're going to go dance with your kid, all anyone's going to see is, oh, look at that cute dad doing his best for his kid, instead of, oh, look at that idiot.
Oh no, everyone's going to look at you and go, wow, there is no skill there whatsoever, but he cares so much about his children.
That's a champion.
Doing it anyway. Yep. That's a unicorn right there.
He is married to one lucky lady. All right. But the relationship that we have with our body is an important topic, and one that we spend quite a bit of time on in this interview. It is with Erica Mather. She is the author of Your Body, Your Best Friend. The conversation, I hope you find it as fascinating as we did. It was just one of the most authentic and real conversations that we've had with almost any of our guests. And really looking forward to sharing it with you now. It really begins with sort of her struggle with her own body and how it helped her shape her relationship with it.
So the chronic illness is that I have migraine headaches. And the injury started quite young. I just started sort of like falling down for no apparent reason. Yeah, and eventually doctors thought maybe it was like a neurological issue. Eventually they just said like your body grew too fast for your nervous system. But it was the beginnings of a lot of also sports related injuries. I had tendonitis in my right shoulder for the first time when I was 8. It's quite young for a sports injury. And then I was a swimmer, so I also had back-related injuries and neck-related injuries because I was a butterflyer. And what I learned is that I just had terrible form. This is what I've learned later in life, going back into the pool, is like, I wasn't using my core strength at all. I was just flopping around in the water like a noodle, and shockingly, I'm very strong, which some people are surprised to discover if I pick them. Like one of my clients, I picked him last week and he was like, oh, you're very strong. I was like, yes, I know. But I was strong enough that I basically broke my own bones in the pool. So I had back injuries from just being a floppy butterflying noodle in the pool. So anyway, it's been quite a journey. And then I learned about yoga, and yoga is where I started to have a better understanding of myself. But it's a thing to come to yoga when you have a broken and battered body, which often people do when they come to yoga. I found that people arrive at yoga because they're at an inflection point in their life. They're sick, they're getting divorced, they're moving across the country, something like that. So the inflection point, I think, is the common denominator. But my journey with body image is in many ways through this prism of being sick.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a bit about your body image issues. Tell me how that sort of became something you were aware enough about to sort of become an advocate for the way we change our relationship with body image.
I became aware enough of it specifically through yoga, which is a practice of self-study. So I don't know how much you or your listeners know about yoga, but built into it is this notion of self-study. Self being like self with a small s, but self being like, how do you fit into things? So also, where is your place in the world? And then big S, like kind of the energy that runs through all things. So it was through coming to yoga that I started to understand something that I sort of intrinsically knew, which is that I had a bad relationship with my body, that the body was just an ornament, that it was a performance vehicle, and that was it, ornamental or like get shit done. So, it was there that I learned that maybe my body could be functional for other things. And so body image, the way that I define body image, is basically the internal picture that you make of your body and the relationship that you have to it, that then you project out into the world. And I think this is important because sometimes people look at a person, a woman, and they'll think perhaps because she's being a bit of an exhibitionist that she's confident. And confidence is actually how people perceive you. Right. So that's like an outward in thing. Yeah. But like body image is like an inward out thing. So I wanted to discern between those things, because you might perceive that because of a way that a person is in the world, or the way that they perform really in the world, that they feel good about themselves, but that may not be the case.
Right.
So I discovered at yoga that I actually had a pretty terrible relationship with my body, which shockingly might have something to do with how sick I was, which we nod knowingly, like, yeah, but that knowing nod comes usually because your body has given you the bill. Mm-hmm. And then you backtrack and you realize later, oh, I did this to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sure. That resonates really closely. I found yoga through, I was having symptoms of tingling hands and feet, which turned out to be a side effect of medication I was taking. But thankfully I had the side effect because I went to yoga and uncovered all these things. I ended up getting my 200-hour cert and really dove into it. And I still say to this day, like, nothing has changed me internally more than yoga has. Like, it has made me so, almost in some cases to a fault, hyper aware of myself and knowing that this is wrong because of this, not because of any external stimulation. It's been a life-changing practice for me. So I'd love to hear, more about what you discovered during that process internally.
Well, first of all, pertaining specifically to my illness, which was migraine headaches, was I discovered in a new way just how messed up my neck was, like really messed up. I was also a professional piano player, so I had a lot of upper back and injury, and then like kind of anterior head carriage injury, and a lot of like right hand injury. It's a mess. It was a hot mess. It was a fit mess. and so I think now this experience, perhaps your listeners also know this experience, that you'll kind of think you're okay, and then you go and you do a pose in yoga and you're like, oh, I'm not okay. And something about doing the posture reveals to you that you're not okay. Whereas just walking around in your life, you think, I could get by. So the process of yoga was like first discovering just how damaged my neck was. And this is 20 years later, and it's still damaged far less, but it's taken 20 years to get to a place where I could like have what I would call like normal cervical spine function. So there was that, but then there was the other piece which was just noticing how estranged I was from my own body, how distant from it, and how contemptuous of it actually I was. And all of those things went hand in hand. And what I talk about in my book, Your Body, Your Best Friend, actually is that this is a form of objectification. And we often objectify ourselves. We are the first perpetrators and the worst perpetrators often, right? And we do this to ourselves because society has taught us. I think society has taught men in particular that you are not to have a spiritual life, that you're not to have a relationship with yourself, that you are here to perform a function. Thank you very much. Protect, provide. That's what you're taught. And So I think men, the book is written to women, but I'm going to shed a little tear here because I feel very much for my brothers at how society has taught you that you don't have a right to, these relationships in this particular way. Anyway, so this sort of objectification is what we've been taught. And I learned about that at yoga, just how estranged I was. And so the journey that the book talks about, Your Body, Your Best Friend, is kind of like creating this road back home to yourself. And yourself is like a big topic. So we start in the book with the body. Like, let's just start there. Yeah. Self in Western descriptions might mean, your mental self, your intellectual self, your physical self, right? The yogis describe self in a different way. The road home that I articulate in the book is like, let's just start. Let's see if you could be friendly to your body and then talk about all that other stuff.
This is something I've struggled with my entire life. I was a heavy kid starting from about third grade up until just a few years ago. I lost about 70 pounds, largely due to yoga and other practices. Thank you. And Zach and I were just talking about this. We were guests on another show recently, and we were talking about that sort of, I guess, the way you identify with your body, the way you feel in your own body especially after having lost a lot of weight. I'm 6'3". I'm a big guy. I've never not been a big guy, whether I'm heavy or not. But I always feel like, and have always felt like, I take up too much room in any space that I'm in. And so that relationship that I have with my own body image is a hot mess. I always feel like whatever I'm doing, even if I'm in the corner quietly sitting, with my soda water, I'm taking up way too much space in the room. So what advice do you have for people that sort of struggle with that disconnect between the reality of what their body is and the space they take up in the world and what they feel in their own minds or hearts?
I'm so glad you brought this question, because I had a boyfriend who was a very tall person and he was shy. Mm-hmm. And I felt so much for him, because when you're 6'3" and have red hair, everybody notices you. Yeah. There's no way around it. Yeah. Right. And so I really, I honor the question of what it is when you are just big and there is no escaping, and maybe you want to take up less space. I think that this has a lot to do with, and I'm just going to go woo like real hard.
We love the woo. Yeah.
Love it. Okay. I'm going to woo real hard, real fast, which is that I think that there's a difference between being born and then deciding to live.
Yes.
Right. So we're all here. Thank you very much, Mom and Dad. You tore me out of the cosmos and brought me here against my will. Thanks a lot. Right? But then there's the choice to live. And I feel like coming to terms with your own body in all of its shape and form is part of the choice to live. Mm-hmm. Right. And so really to be very brutal about it and blunt, I think the first choice is that you have to decide that you want to live, right? And then when you decide that you want to live, then maybe you decide that you also have the right to live. And then you have the right to take up as much space as you need and as you want. And that's up to you. I mean, I've seen people who are very adept at becoming invisible, right? So if part of your thing is that you want to become invisible, even if you're 6'3", you can do that, mm-hmm. right? It's a matter of shrinking. My caveat is don't make shrinking your permanent habit, right? Because that actually like harms your spirit. Mm-hmm. I think the shrinking. But if that's part of it is you want to not be seen, then you can not be seen. And I work on this all the time because, as a yoga teacher, it's my job to be seen. But being seen all the time is exhausting, right? So when I'm traveling around, usually what I do is I shrink, I conceal, right? Just so I can like protect myself.
Right.
But I think what we're getting around to a little bit, perhaps, Jeremy, is like the discrepancy between your body mm-hmm. and the person you feel yourself to be.
Yes.
Right. And that I think is what many, many people struggle with. And I think that very few people feel congruency, actually.
Interesting.
So I think, and I love that you as a man are talking about it, because I don't think men talk about it a lot. I think women talk about it in part because we're forced into performative femininity. I think men are also forced into performative masculinity, and maybe you don't want to be that kind of man. But I think the topic is more public, at least amongst women. So I think that the absence of congruency between your corporeal form and who you feel yourself to be is something that everybody feels to some degree. And so I think that knowing that you're not alone in that may immediately make you feel less alone.
Yeah.
Right. And then more free, or maybe more resourced, let's call it more resourced, to do the work of resolving this conflict as you see fit.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, like, my conflict is that I'm like, my body is like hyper feminine. Right. And just like, I have a lot of luxurious hair. I could cut it off, but I decided not to. I have a very curvy figure. I have a lot of boobs. I have a lot of butt. Right. It's hyper feminine. But I don't feel hyper feminine. I feel like the person I am actually swings a lot more masculine in a way. So this discrepancy has been with me for a long time. And I think that maybe women are more, maybe society is more permissive of women exploring that than it is of men exploring that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the advice that I giving you, I think, or giving your listeners is to be patient and be gentle and know that you have the right to explore this discrepancy. Like, you don't have to perform femininity. You don't have to perform masculinity. And I'm sort of parsing them in those binaries just for the sake of like simplicity, but knowing that along that spectrum, there's a whole bunch of stuff.
Right.
And that I think also that knowing that you are not alone in that, you as a man, you as a woman, you as a person in between are not alone in that. I think for the most part, I would speculate that everybody feels that to a certain degree if they really like thought about it.
Yeah. Everything you just said, like I had a couple of questions in the middle of it and it just got so deep and it threw me. So
you just blew Zach's mind.
It was so good.
And I'm just saying, you two are great listeners. You didn't even interrupt me. That's amazing. Thank you so much.
When you're hearing what is just resonating really so well, right? I mean, it's just, I don't know. One of the things I learned probably too late in life is that like you get more out of listening than you do talking. But all of that is just wonderful. And I do want to, ask about some practical tips, I guess. So when I was a kid, my dad constantly told me that I was fat, and he would point out a larger gentleman in a restaurant that was a really big guy and be like, that's you in 20 years. And just, my dad was a good guy. He had a couple of faults. So my body, and I ended up being a big guy. I was kind of close to 300 pounds, and I ended up losing most of it to the point where like I had abs showing at one point, but I still felt like I was that 300-pound guy. And to the point where I as a kid, I learned to hold my stomach in, like, and it has become muscle memory to me. And even to this day, I still hold my stomach in, even if there's nothing to hold in. So, once you get stuck in that pattern of body image internally, I think this applies to everyone. What are some things we can do to really kind of unlock that and convince ourselves that story's not true anymore?
Well, I just want to first like just honor kind of that transformation that I'm hearing you both have been through, which is a lot, because I mean, that just takes a lot of resolve and a lot of lifestyle change. And I think it's intriguing what you both are talking to is I'm different on the outside, but I don't feel different on the inside. And that's actually what my book is about.
Right.
Yes.
is changing your perception. And you two are talking about it from a very particular vantage point, which is very tricky, right? Because I wrote the book about first allowing that you have to allow yourself to be as you are before you go about the change, right? If you are trying to lose weight, for instance, from a place of hate, it just doesn't work. Like, these projects don't work. And so I wrote the book more from like, hey, let's build a foundation of love and then talk about the change. And you two are in a retrospective space. I've already made the change, but the mental patterns are still there. Now what do I do? So that's intriguing. So first of all, I think that it's important to pay attention to how people respond to you, right? Because our motivation for making the change is to have different outcomes in our lives. Yes?
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Right. So your dad was like trying to protect you from having an outcome. And whatever outcome that was that he thought was like, if you're that big guy, you're never, I don't know, going to get the girls or the job. I don't know what he thought, right? But but he was trying to protect you from an outcome. Now, your job, I think, is to pay attention to how people respond to you and to notice that you're having particular outcomes that are based on a certain perception, right? So, and I'm basing this a bit on experience, my own experience, which is it took me a long time to realize that I'm pretty.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that people were reacting to me because I was ugly. But what I didn't understand growing up was that people were reacting to me because I'm unusual. I was tall, I was busty, I grew up in the Midwest around a lot of blonde people. I have an ambiguously white face. Like, what is she? Is she Russian? Is she Argentinian? You know, right? I wasn't like, oh, she's German and Danish. Onward, right? So I realized that the reactions that I was getting, which were to be ridiculed, was in part because that's what people do when they don't understand, when you don't fit in, right? So I figured there was something wrong with me, and so I'm telling you this because it took a long time for me to retool my understanding of the reactions that people were having to me and map them onto a reality, which is that I'm pretty. And so I think that maybe the undoing for you, Zach, is to start to pay attention to the way people react to you and map it onto an understanding of yourself as fit, handsome, kind. You know, people react first, of course, to your exterior, but I think they react almost as quickly to your interior. Right? They can, like, it's really that thing of like what you get out, what you put out, you get back. Right? Sometimes not that fast. Right? If you're making a change. Right? Like if you're like, I want more love in my life. Why isn't there more love? It's because the internal thing moves faster than the external thing. Right? Energy moves faster than matter.
Right.
So I think that would be the first step, is because the two of you, and I don't know if your listeners are also sort of in this sort of category of people who have made this change, right? But to start paying attention to the reactions that you're getting. Now, what I hear from women who've lost a lot of weight is that the reactions that they get are unnerving.
Interesting.
Because men in particular start to react to them differently because they're thin.
Right.
And they feel like they're the same person. They're exactly the same person they were. But now they're just thin. And you wouldn't have liked me when I was fat. But now you like me that I'm thin. But I'm exactly the same person. And that's unnerving. And I don't know if that's the kind of experience that you've had, is that you're unnerved by the experience because you feel to be the same person. Yes, no, maybe.
Well, it's interesting. There's sort of a two-pronged thing there. On one hand, I'm fueled by the, oh man, you're looking really good. You must have you must be really working hard on it, or like this sort of reward system where like that sort of fuels me to keep going. Like, oh, all of a sudden I'm getting the attention that I feel like I deserve, but I sort of hide from because I know I don't deserve it because of the way I see myself. So it sort of feeds this beast to keep going. But then it also, like I said, it sort of scares me sort of back into the corner. Oh, well, now I'm being seen. And so I better maybe stop doing that. Like it's sort of this double-edged sword for me.
I was having a conversation with a guy friend of mine who's in the fitness industry yesterday about exactly this thing, the deserving what you get. Like that feeling of like, ooh, do I deserve this thing?
Yes.
I think the answer is yes. The answer is always yes. Right? Because the only reason you're getting it is because you put in the work to get it. Now, are you prepared to receive the bounty?
That's a different deal. Yeah.
Right. So there's also like a preparation to receive, like you have to be in shape in a different way to receive abundance. Right. Everybody wants abundance, but the fact of the matter is that are you ready to receive it? Do you have a receptacle that's big enough and like sturdy enough to hold it? You know? So I think what you're talking about is like, oh, but if you can borrow my confidence, then just borrow my confidence. And when that happens, to be like, yeah, I'm ready for this.
I notice on sort of the other end of it that when my new shape, look, whatever, has been normal for a while and those compliments stop coming in, I'm then sort of uninspired to keep going because I'm like, oh, I'm not getting the reward system anymore. So what's the point? And sort of give up and fall off the wagon. So
here's the philosophy, is that your mind wants to understand that it is real. And its first thing that it encounters as it presses out into the world is your body. So it evaluates your body and then creates a sense of identity around your body. But then there's also the data coming back at you, right? There's how people react to you coming back at you that also starts to create your identity. And so, as we know, yoga is like this inner game, outer game. A lot of times we talk about yoga just as an inner game, but I don't think that's an accurate representation. We create an inner game so that we can have a different outer game, and so that we can have a different experience coming back at us. So what I would recommend is to pay attention to how people react to you and start to retool your sense of self based on that data. And mostly, which mostly is something I wouldn't recommend. Right? So the irony here is that this is a recommendation I wouldn't make. I would say, like, get a really solid sense of self and build that up so it's unshakable and unmovable and solid like a rock. And no matter what happens, you feel it, you know who you are. But you're like, but that guy, that's not who I am, right? So now we're in a different scenario. Yeah. The truth of like existence is that we're always sort of doing a little inner, a little outer. How do people react? Do I like that? Is it who I want to be? Do they misunderstand me? And always sort of this inner, outer. And so I think that that this is a place where for you to retool your sense of self would be to pay attention to how people react to you, and then decide if you like it. Decide if you want to allow it to reframe your sense of self.
I do like that. And I do want to. And I actually have, some evidence from the other day that I caught. I went golfing with some friends, and of the group, I am the one in the best shape. And I went last on the first tee, and I walked up to swing my golf club, and I took a couple of practice swings, and I heard them talking like, oh, so the athletic one is going to show us up, right? Just making a comment. And I took note of it, and I, swung and, hit the ball into the woods like I normally do. So athleticism has no impact on my game at all. But, it was a comment that I made to my wife later. And I was like, other people recognize me as athletic. Mm-hmm. I think that that's more evidence, right? I need to recognize the evidence. And I do like that, right? I like hearing that because it's different than what I believe. So just keep hearing the evidence, reinforcing it. I think that's great.
See, and I'm going to play armchair psychologist, or maybe ask you to, because you know more about these things than I do. But for me, the inner voice is so much louder than a chorus of outer voices. And I've had therapists and doctors constantly tell me, maybe don't listen to everybody, but listen to the people you trust. If your wife is the one, this person who's given you their life and decided to spend it with you and loves you so much that they've made all these sacrifices to be with you, et cetera, if that person is telling you something, that's probably worth listening to. Like, keep stock of that. So for me, it is this huge struggle of, I can have all of you and everyone I know and everyone who I encounter say, oh man, you look great. It seems like you're living a good life. You've really turned things around. You're feeling good. Inside, I'm going, you don't know who I'm fighting in here. You don't know the real me. And so that's sort of where I struggle. And a lot of that does come from, being heavy most of my life and sort of what I allowed that to mean to my identity and who I really am.
So you think that the outer voices, like, you've just played a trick on them?
Yes, I've got everybody fooled. Mm. It's this character that I've refined over the years that somehow has convinced everyone that I'm this good guy that's charming and nice and means well, seems to take pretty good care of himself, but inside I'm just constantly fighting with, oh God, how do you keep this character alive?
Because the real you is not a nice guy?
Right. No, and that's the thing. Like, it's this constant arm wrestling in my own head. So, I mean, yeah, we're getting deep into psychology that maybe this isn't the place for, but.
No, I think that's relevant because So what else yoga teaches us that is that all parts are welcome.
Mm-hmm.
Does that come from yoga? It kind of comes from Rumi, and then we adopted it into yoga. All parts are welcome. And there is a part of you that maybe is an inner asshole. I'm an inner asshole, right? And we're always trying to wrangle our inner asshole because it doesn't produce good results. Maybe sometimes it produces great results, actually. So knowing when to allow your inner asshole to be present and not to be present, I think, is relevant. But I had a mentee say something to me the other day that made me shed a tear or two. And this is someone I've worked with for a really, really long time. We were talking about attachment theory. Do you know anything about attachment theory? Maybe as parents you do, maybe not. Okay.
A little bit.
Attachment theory, you know a little bit about it. Yeah. Attachment theory just basically says, like, if you have a calm parent, it helps you learn how to self-soothe, right? And over many, 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 many instances, practicing this self-soothing, that then you too, or your child too, can self-soothe. Yeah. And that's like a secure attachment, right? There's this modeling happening. That's actually like adjacent attachment theory. Attachment theory is a little bit more like about how, not necessarily how the parent handles themselves, but how the attachment happens. But anyway, the point is that there's some sort of modeling. You as a parent self-soothe, then you model the self-soothing for the child because they uptake your emotional state, right? And then they learn how to model it. Okay. So we were going, my mentee, Sarah, and I were sort of going attachment adjacent, and we were talking about her perfectionism. And she basically said that through years and years and years and years of having me accept her perfectionism, that she has learned to accept her perfectionism. And what it was having someone accept your darkness. Perfectionism, maybe we don't think of it as a darkness, right? But it is a form of an asshole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Perfectionism.
Yeah, for sure.
That years and years and years of having someone accept your darkness then does this sort of like self-regulating that then you can accept it. And I actually think that, I was thinking just recently about like my ex, right? You're talking about your wife, Zach, like Jeremy, who's like, accepting your everything, but also the good guy, right? She sticks around probably for the good guy.
Right, of course. Yeah.
Right. But I was thinking about my ex and I was like, the breaking point was really that when it got down to it, you saw my darkness and used it against me instead of seeing my darkness and being like, I love you anyway. Right. And I think that has to do with what we're talking about, because an outward manifestation of weight is, in our society, an outward manifestation of some vice.
I say this all the time. We've talked about this so many times that I always feel like, and maybe I've already said it here, I feel like the shape my body in is directly representative of the inner work that I still have to do. If there are things that I have not processed, that I have not dealt with, and I've learned this week, clearly there are, it explains why I still have some weight to lose and some physical work to do to feel healthier and to feel better, because I don't cope with that stuff correctly. I will eat to soothe myself when I'm feeling down. I will let myself off the hook when I know I need to exercise and I haven't in 5 days. It's all those things that I can look in the mirror and go, that is a direct reflection of the fact that you haven't dealt with your daddy issues. And so instead of dealing with them, you ate 2 cans of Pringles and sat on the couch and stayed up till 2 a.m, not taking care of yourself. And so is that sort of where you're going? Is that your body sort of displays the issues or the work that needs to be done?
I don't think that it's singular in that way, but I think that we have in our society learned to equate health with goodness, like the outward manifestation of health with goodness, which is not always the case. And it could be that. It could be that, right? But I also think that for you, maybe. And this particular mentee, whose name is Sarah, she also, we've been working around body image stuff forever. We have a very sophisticated conversation about it. But I think that also her acceptance of her vices, her darkness, her unresolved parental issues, like that, having someone hold space for those challenges in a way where they don't need to be resolved. They don't need to be fixed, actually. Because the truth of our character is that we are the dark and the light. And the harder you fight against the dark, the more weight it has, the more strength it has. So I think that part of actually the process of acceptance is the process of accepting all of these parts of yourself.
That's spot on with my anxiety. I spent years and years and years fighting against it, trying to figure out how to make it go away. And the day that I embraced it and made friends with it and thanked it for being there and learned to live with it, it changed my life.
And did you experience any outward manifestation physically in your body because that's sort of where we're going with all this. Did you?
Yeah.
Yes. What was the outward manifestation of that inner?
I mean, yeah, I just felt more comfortable in my own body. Like my anxiety was crippling, not as crippling anymore, but it was so crippling to the point where I felt uncomfortable in my body. I felt like my body was just terrible all the time. And that there was an outward appearance of it as well. And it was a direct relation to my anxious feelings, just manifesting as physical ailments in my body. But once I accepted that, once I got over that anxiety, there's a couple of things. One, the body feelings kind of went away. And then two, I stopped caring what other people thought from those anxious thoughts. Just as a random example of, like, if my shirt came up and exposed a roll, right? I would be very nervous, very anxious about that. Now I don't care.
Cool. Yeah. So that experience of your body, and even outward manifestation of it, is the product accepting a part of yourself that we usually battle against.
Mm-hmm.
And so for Jeremy, I think like you're like, people are like, hey, you look great, you look healthy. And you're like, you don't know. Right. And you think that you like got away with something, but it's a both and world, you know? And I think that we suffer a lot from trying to make it an either or world. Right. So it's like, yeah, I do look great. And I sit on the couch and eat Pringles and feel sad. Right. So
that's true. Yeah.
That's the truth. It's both and, you know, is the shape of your body an outward manifestation of unresolved issues? Potentially. But I also don't want to I don't want someone to hear that and then think that that also applies to them. I think it's like a really case by case.
Of course. Yeah.
Thing.
Yeah.
So, and we sort of live in a world of prescriptives and, you know, one track plans and, you know, this fits for everybody. So I just want to be really careful about that, you know, and it could be that the way for you to resolve the issue is to accept it and then your body changes. Or it could be that you accept it and your body doesn't change and you also no longer care, like Zach. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's like, either way you kind of win. Either way you win when you accept your own darkness. And I think that my point too around this is that having people around you who accept your darkness helps you accept your darkness. It's
funny. This is just reminding me of sort of where a lot of my journey to getting in better shape or healthier or whatever started. Was I was sort of looking around the office at work at other guys my age, my general level of health, fitness, whatever. And I kind of looked around and went, oh, they're all like me. This is just normal for being a 40-something dude to be kind of overweight and just sort of going to work I'm like everyone else. So just when I started to accept that, and one of my colleagues in particular just when I started to accept that it was okay to just be kind of a heavy dude and that's fine, and for some people that is fine, all of a sudden he got on the same boat and like started going to the gym, started eating a little better. And it, in my mind, it sort of became this race. He had no idea, but I was like, oh, well, if he can do it, maybe I can do it. It was the weird, like I remember sitting in my chair and going like, that's it. I don't have to care anymore. I'm in my 40s. I give up. I'm not going to keep chasing the dragon of one day being in shape. And all of a sudden,
God wins.
Yeah. And all of a sudden the comparison that let me off the hook, like overnight became the thing that was like, okay, you need to, you still have half a life left. You can still live healthier. You don't have to give up. So what role does comparison play in our relationship with our body image? Because I had two diametrically opposed things happen with the same comparison, literally like in the same week. And it changed everything.
Well, I think you just said it. It's like comparison can be permissive or it can be motivating. And it really depends on what kind of an outcome I think you want to have. Right. And you actually said it in there. You said, I've got half my life left to live. Right. And I just had lunch with someone who's 83 and rides his bike all around New York City. And my uncle is 83 and slowly dying in a bed. Mm-hmm. Right. And one of the things that really strikes as a comparison is like, I never saw him do anything to take care of his body ever. Nothing. So how does one guy just like skis and bikes and blah, 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 and another guy deteriorates? And the exercise may or may not like lead to that outcome. We're not sure, but it may. So maybe we know that one thing really doesn't work. The exercise may help you. So maybe you should do that. As one of my friends pointed out, it's not like exercising is giving you more of your 30s. It's only giving you more of your 70s and 80s.
That's true.
Right? So it's going more for the end. The 30s are gone, I mean, for me at least. It sounds like Jeremy.
Yes.
Mine too.
Yours too. Yeah. It's not like, no, you got 20 years of the 30s. No, it doesn't work like that. But comparison, I think comparison should work in a healthy fashion. And when you find comparison working in an unhealthy fashion, degrading your energy, giving you a less optimistic view of the world, making you less generous with the people around you, right? I think that's important. For women, I think comparison is, I think that men just have a healthier attitude around competition is sort of what I see. Like I see that men like, even when they're like grinding one another down, they're kind of lifting one another up through competition. You're nodding, Zach's smiling. No, yes, maybe.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that.
It's a paradox. Like I'm kicking your ass, but it's lifting you up. Mm-hmm. I had a guy I went to music school with. He would get together with someone I went to music school with, and they would just have lunch and brag. That's what they got together to do. They would just brag about their accomplishments. And I was like, that's such a man thing to do, right? Girls don't ever get together and brag. And now actually it's something that I ask my women friends to do is like, let's brag about our accomplishments, because what women tend to feel like, I think, around comparison and competition is they feel less. They feel less, like somehow this is diminishing me. Yeah, I am less. Whereas men, I see somehow they become more through it. They become more motivated. They become more resourced. And I'm not really sure what that is. I'm not sure why men and women react to those things so differently. I think that women have been trained for millennium that there is a scarcity of resources, whereas men have access to all the resources. So it may just be that sort of like that biological kind of like ancestral inheritance. You know, what do you think? You have got lots of girls in your lives.
Yeah,
Daughters, wives.
Yeah.
I was kind of laughing because I am on the other side of it from Zach. Like for me, I'm not driven to compete. I feel like if somebody else is bragging about their I've in the podcast space, I've had this, and I've been in this space for 20 years, and I've seen other shows that are not as good as anything I've ever done that just skyrocket to whatever success is for them or my perception. And I just feel like throwing my hands up. So I'm not driven to compete. I feel that sort of same, well, I'll never be able to pull that off. So what am I even doing here?
Mm.
Yeah. I run the opposite side of that, where I use it to my advantage, right? If I'm working out in my basement and it's just me and nobody's watching me, I'm going to take a lot of breaks and, be like, I'll just turn the video off early. So I was dealing with a whole bunch of injuries over the last 6 months, so I had to stop going to the gym. But I finally, just this week, I went back to a CrossFit gym, and knowing that I needed to take it easy because I would just hurt myself again if I went in too hot. And yeah, of course, there was a 20-something dude right next to me doing the same workout, and I couldn't catch him, but I had to compete with him. And I'm paying dearly for it today. But it's something about being in the presence of other people. Doesn't matter, guy, girl. If I see somebody going faster than me, I have to keep up with them. And I know that that's what works best for me. So I use it to my advantage, and I go to gyms and I work out when I'm around other people because I know I can't hold that side of me in when I'm in that situation.
I think this is another both and situation. It's like, no one's you. No one's going to work out the way you do. No one's going to make a podcast the way you do. No one's you. And there are other people in the world. And that can
that's
be
the problem here, really. When it gets down to it, there are other people in the world, and that's the problem.
People are so problematic. In one of the quotes from my book, Your Body, Your Best Friend, that I pulled out of actually a Robert Greene book, who you nod knowingly. Robert Greene writes on The Art of Power, I think it was. And then there's these whole series of books on seduction and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, one of the quotes is, you will do much better. This is a rough paraphrase. You'll do better in the world if you realize there's always going to be someone in front of you. There's always going to be someone better than you at what you do. And does that mean that you should throw up your hands and stop? No, it just means that there's always going to be someone better than you. And that was very helpful to me as a perfectionist also. And sometimes I relate to that feeling, Jeremy, I'm really good at what I do. Why are those people having more success or whatever? And I actually think those thoughts tend not to be that motivating. Those thoughts actually are degrading. And what I've come to realize is just nobody has my karma. My karma is set up differently. And I need to understand my karma, because my karma, I think, is, I'll be very frank, it's rarer. Whatever I'm made of is rarer. And so that's going to require more study, more tending, more patience, and that I think is a framing also that yoga can offer you. And to pull it back to your body, just how this all maps into our relationship with our body, it's both and. There's no one in the world like you. Your body's going to function differently. You're going to eat differently. And you can maybe take some lessons from the people around you. But know that there's always going to be someone who is ahead of you, whatever that means, and be okay with it. And then be excited for them. Be excited for them. I had a little moment of that this morning because someone I know from the yoga world just converted his Sprinter into a van boy life sort of scenario. And he and his wife are going on a 3-week road trip. And I was I'm so jealous, jealous. And then I was convert that shit into happiness for them immediately. And I said, I'm so happy for you. I can't wait to do something like that. Can't wait to do something like that. Yeah.
What a great spin. That's amazing. That's a really, really great way of thinking about it. First, I applaud you, and I'm going to take that and implement it in my life because I'm a little jealous of that.
Well, you're next in line, my friend. You got it. You got this.
So can I switch gears just a little bit? So I think we already talked about the fact that Jeremy and I both have young daughters. My daughter's 9. And, she came home from school, I don't know, a month ago, and she was watching TV and relaxing. And then, we got talking later in the night, and she was like, I'm so fat. She's not fat. She has nothing on her. And I was like appalled by it. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe
heartbreaking.
Yeah. But I didn't, I let the comment go, and I didn't really touch on it. I didn't want to scratch the itch and make it worse. Right. But I talked to my wife about it later, and she's like, well, she probably heard something about it at school and this and that. And she's like, and honestly, dude, you're the one who walks around the house saying you're fat all the time, and you're not. So my wife, gave it back to me and said, this could be some of your fault, but regardless of where it comes from, and I take responsibility for that, but regardless of where it comes from, like it is heartbreaking to see it happen to a 9-year-old. And I imagine it's happening to 9-year-olds all over the place. And like, how is that happening? Why is it happening? And how can we do something about that?
Well, these days, I think it's happening because of social media more and more. And the very early access to that. I don't know what kind of access your children have to it.
Limited.
Okay. Then I think that it's kind of ancestral. Not to, like you said, I could be woo, but we, like, you're like, where did that come from? And your wife's, well, maybe it's you. And there is data that says that children actually respond more to what you say actually than what you do. Like the language for some reason is more impactful than the behavior. So that may be something just to check, and she put you on alert, right? You are on alert. Mm-hmm. But I think the ancestral thing is that girls, I think, feel a lot very early, and they don't have the language to articulate what it is that they're feeling. And they understand somehow that if I say, I feel fat, that they're going to get some kind of something. They're going to get something back to that. Because maybe they don't know how to say, I feel frightened, or I feel unsafe, or I feel uncertain. Like those are very like sophisticated things for a 9-year-old to say, right? Mm-hmm. But girls understand somehow that if they say, I feel fat, that they are articulating a myriad of uncomfortable things, and they might get some reaction that would feel soothing.
If I can back up the data that you referenced, I think this year realized that a lot of my sort of obsession or struggle with my own weight does come from watching my mom growing up. And, or I should actually say listening to my mom as you referenced, because she did it all. She did the Jane Fonda videos. She went to Curves. She did the Weight Watchers. She did like all the different food programs, verbally struggled through all of it, saying things like, I feel fat. I feel this way. I feel that way. I didn't take from her the message of work out all the time, work hard. I took the words that I heard about how she felt about herself and made that my own issues. I say the same things, and as I say them, I go, oh my God, that was my mother speaking through. It's not even myself. I hear her as a child, speaking out through myself. So Absolutely. I can totally relate to, and I only realized that in therapy, like this year I was talking about it and I mentioned it to my therapist who I've seen for like 8 years. And he's like, you've never talked about that before. And I was like, I never realized how much of an impact her words had. And there was, there was one moment that haunts me. Well, I shouldn't say haunts me, sticks with me, where she was on, Nutrisystem or whatever the fad of the month was. And she was having the dessert that she was allowed that day. And it looked really good. And I remember asking, I must have been 7 or 8 and just was like, can I have a bite of that? And she just like shoved it at me and was just like, just eat it. Like she was so mad that she couldn't have her one thing, her one treat without interruption. And I remember that still kind of wounds me to think about that, like wanting something that she had that was special to her somehow hurt her. So it's interesting that it is very much the words and not the action that stick with our children. And so it's interesting, exactly. That is what you're experiencing, I think, and seeing that play out in your own living room.
Yes. I'm just gonna tape my mouth shut from here on out because all I cause issues like that. And I've contributed so much money to the swear jar.
You're going broke and ruining your kid. Good job.
Yep. But she's got her little notebook that says notes to my future therapist.
There you go. I guess sort of on that same path, I want to ask this question delicately because every time I hear somebody ask it, it comes across as fat shaming. And I want to be very delicate not to do that. But in asking or advocating for people to accept their body, accept who they are in their body, if that body is going to kill them at 45 from diabetes or heart attack or whatever, is there a danger in promoting body acceptance, body love, however you want to phrase it, to somebody who is massively unhealthy?
You're asking me if it's okay to be fat.
No, I'm asking if there's a danger in being okay with being fat. Because I know if I had stuck with the guy who I was a few years ago, who was like, I'm in my 40s, I can give up and stop caring about this, I would be a lot less healthy than I am now and have a lot shorter life probably than I will because of the choices I made since then. So do you worry about that? Is there a concern in promoting just loving yourself how you are, no matter what?
I think that what I do is nuanced enough that I don't worry about it. And here's why. Because I know that projects that are born out of self-hatred fail, and projects that are born out of self-love will succeed. Jenny Craig said, self-love is the most effective form of weight loss. Jenny Craig knew that. Mm-hmm. A person who made an empire out of weight loss knew that. So yeah, that's my very answer is I know this to be true. And I know that it's 100% true. Now someone's going to come back at me and say, but what if someone doesn't love themselves, but they feel motivated to lose weight because of comparison?
Right.
Like, well, okay. You know what? I mean, the evolution of a human soul is very zigzag. So maybe you start there and then you discover it doesn't work. And then you're like, well, that didn't work. So maybe I'll try this other thing. Mm-hmm. What happens if I originate this project from a place of self-love? How do I behave? I also think that this particular issue around health stands at a very peculiar intersection in the United States. You have a God-given right to destroy your body and don't burden society.
Right.
And it's like, well, which is it going to be? Because one of those is socialism.
Yeah.
That's what people would call it, socialism. And the other is free market capitalism. Which is it going to be?
Yeah.
And so we are at a very funny, even with this pandemic, it's been a very funny, clash of these particular viewpoints. And I have to say that I think free market capitalism is going to win. But free market capitalism has also created social constructs that make Black and brown people more susceptible to being overweight. They position their neighborhoods in places that are polluted. They employ Black and brown people to make crappy food and then feed it back to them. I mean, it's pretty astonishing at how our food systems keep a certain segment of the population oppressed. So that's troubling. And free market capitalism, man, you know? So I think that that's also at play when it's like, do I worry about this body acceptance, excusing a person's body that will kill them? And part of me is like, well, I'm a capitalist. It's also their choice. It's also their choice.
That's a good point. And I like what you said, because I do think that ultimately, at least in my case, it wasn't so much self-hate or anger with my own issues that made me do something better. It was more about really loving my kids more than myself and wanting to be around enough for them to then go, oh, well, if I love them and I want to be around for them, I must have enough value to offer the world that's worth doing something differently, instead of giving up and just waiting for it to all come to a violent end. So, so that's a great point.
And that points also to like, how is self-love generated? And a lot of times self-love is generated first through loving another person. And then I think the reflection of like, I can love them. Why is it that I cannot take care of myself? And sometimes the motivation to take care of yourself arises out of this sense of wanting to be around, to protect, to provide, to be present, to enjoy. Yeah. And then maybe you loop that back around on yourself. And that has to do with the title of the book, Your Body, Your Best Friend. And it should be Your Body, Your Daughter.
Right.
Your body, your offspring, you know, which is actually true, because that is, you know, a little snippet of your DNA walking around. That is you.
Yep. I've come to use kind of that trick, right? I am my own worst critic. And I actually envision now, like if I'm being particularly hard on myself, I'll envision saying those same things to my daughter and what her reaction is. And when I see that, I'm like, wow, you can't be that mean to yourself. You gotta reel this back in and love yourself.
That's a great trick. I think that's a great trick.
It helps that my daughter looks just like me.
You're like looking at a mini version of you and you're like, I can't say that to her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I make the point in the book that we are our own worst perpetrators. We are the meanest to ourselves. And that's the kind of violence we're willing to exact upon ourselves is kind of staggering and shocking. And why is that exactly? I'm not sure, but it is something to work on. It sounds like you've got a great trick to work on it.
It's remembering to use it when I need it the most is usually the problem. But you mentioned it, you talk about it in the book. I mean, what are some other things people can do to be kinder to themselves?
What I think you're asking is not what are gestures of kindness, but what are motivations towards kindness?
Mm-hmm.
Because the gesture of kindness you could do, and it could be empty.
Right.
Which a lot of people do. It's like, you know, all the bubble baths in the world won't remove your self-hatred if you still hate yourself. And, you know, that would be the kindness, the cup of tea.
Yeah.
I really think that this is shadow work. And so going back to what we talked about accepting all of you and sort of because that's unconditional love. Yeah. The problem is not that you hate yourself, but you hate the parts of yourself that you think are unworthy or despicable or revolting, you know, whatever it is, you know. So part of the work is accepting those parts of yourself from the get-go and making space for them. And I think it's hard to find people who will do that for you, because there are consequences, right? To other people's inner assholes coming out. Yet there are consequences. And so finding those people to do that work for you can be tricky, but you can do it for yourself. And actually, I say in the book, the only unconditional love that you are guaranteed in your life is you for you.
Yeah.
That's the only one you're guaranteed. If another human does it for you, even one, amazing. And so I think it goes back to, why people want to change their body is because they want to have this outward manifestation of goodness, right? Because we have decided that if you're fit, if you're healthy, that then you must be good. If you're beautiful, you must be good. This is one of the, weird partial truths, a beautiful being will radiate out beauty, no matter kind of like what the corporeal form is. But some people are terrible and very beautiful, so, but somewhere along the line, and I sort of spell out this equation in the book where we decided that beauty equated goodness, and that also that goodness meant that you would have good outcomes in your life, right? So if you're beautiful, then you would have good outcomes. So reverse engineering this to understand that that may or may not be true, right? Just because you're beautiful doesn't mean there's going to be good outcomes in your life. And beautiful people can be horrible. To reverse engineer this and go back to the beginning, which is the first chapter of the book is Disarm the Happiness Trap. And it's basically, I'm saying that we have staked happiness, our experience of happiness, on how our bodies look. But now we're going even a little deeper. Thanks, guys. And I would say that the happiness is also founded on your sense of worthiness, your sense of deserving, which also originates from your sense of being good. And so the thing is to go inside and know that you are not alone in being an asshole. You just aren't. We do a good job pretending to not be, because we get better results for the most part if we do. But this is a Buddhist tenet, and I think that you're aware of it, is that in humanity is all things. And you can water the seeds of kindness, and those seeds will bloom. And you cannot water those other seeds, but it doesn't mean that they just go away if you don't water them. They're still there. And I think this is the shadow work, is knowing that they're there and also accepting them. For me, and I'll just anchor this on me, some of the things that I have not liked about myself is like, I can be very weirdly vindictive. I can be resentful. I can be bitter. I can feel like life has shortchanged me. And these are attributes that they don't help, but they're there. Okay? And so for me to turn around and really look at those things, bitterness, resentment, vindictiveness, feeling shortchanged, and try to assess them against reality and also not make them wrong, has been part of my healing process. And I think that when you decide to love all of you, that you will have better outcomes than if you decide to love only part of you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, first I want to thank you, because this has been much less an interview and much more a conversation, which is what we always try and do here. And so thank you for that, and for being wildly generous with your time. It's a conversation I don't want to end, but we are out of time. If people do want to check out the book, learn more about you, follow you wherever you are, where do they go? Where do they find you online?
Basically, my website, www.ericamather.com, ERICAMATHER.com. I only say that because Erica can be spelled any number of ways. And unfortunately, as to my knowledge, I'm not related to Marshall Mathers. There is no S at the end of my name. It's just Mather.
Got it.
period.com. So my website would be great if you're interested. I'm also mostly on Instagram, mostly present there for things, although I am in and out of Facebook intermittently, but mostly on Instagram.
And you're a fun follow there too. Thank you again so much for the conversation and for all of your insight and your work in the book. That's very powerful stuff. Thank you so much.
It's so much my pleasure. Thanks for being willing to take a deep dive with me.
Definitely. All right, her name is Erica Mather. All of the links that she referenced and where to find her is available at our website, thefitmess.com. Just look in the show notes for this episode. And man, that was, as I mentioned at the beginning, just a connection that we made with somebody that is, I think, is pretty unmatched to most of the other interviews that we've done on this show.
Yeah, I truly enjoy all the other interviews,
Yes.
but that one and all of our other interviews, we try and keep them a little generic. We try and keep some of our problems out of it in order for it to, be useful for the masses. But man, we went for a therapy session in that one.
Yeah, maybe we should send her
asking question after question about myself.
I know. And another thing about me. Yes, we'll get to your book. But no, she's just a fascinating interview and a very cool person. And she's a lot of fun to follow on Instagram as well, as I mentioned. So I hope you'll follow her there. Again, all those links are on our website, thefitmess.com. While you're there, please subscribe to the newsletter so you're always in touch with what's going on with the show. You can also subscribe on whatever podcast player you prefer and follow us on whatever social media channels you may be on. But that's going to do it for this episode of The Fit Mess. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing. We will be back next Wednesday with a brand new episode, again, at thefitmess.com.
See you, everyone.
We know this podcast is amazing and doesn't seem to lack anything, but we need a legal disclaimer. Prior to implementing anything discussed in this podcast, it is your responsibility to conduct your own research and consult your physician. You should assume that Jeremy and Zach don't know what they're talking about, and they're not liable for any physical or emotional issues that occur directly or indirectly from listening to this podcast.